Hello and welcome to the channel True Crime Night Tales. This case is very tough and please, if you don't have strong nerves, don't listen to it. It disturbed me a lot. This incident occurred in France. The main character of this story is named Lydia Guado. She was born on November 13th, 1962, in a town called Maisons-Alfort in the Val-de-Marne department, which is 9 kilometers from Paris. To begin this story, we need to travel back in time. Lydia's future parents, Raymond Guado and his bride Jacqueline, married in 1956. In the early years of their marriage, they had 2 children, a boy named Bruno and his sister Nadia. At first glance, the newly formed family seemed normal in every way. However, sometime after Nadia's birth, their father Raymond was tried for armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. While the man was in prison, his wife Jacqueline started a passionate affair with a certain man, which resulted in her becoming pregnant. During one of the allowed visits, Jacqueline informed her husband of this and made it clear that the child was not his. Nevertheless, Raymond reacted understandingly to the information he heard and expressed his willingness to recognize the child, who was born out of his wife's extramarital affair. Soon, a girl was born and baptized Lydia Guado. A few years later, the man was released and almost immediately broke off official relations with his wife Jacqueline, who was left alone with 3 children. Apparently, the woman did not have much love for her offspring, so she decided to give them to a social organization, which soon placed them in a foster family. According to the available data, the children were lucky and ended up in a family that not only loved them as their own, but also gave them everything they needed for a new beginning. Despite Bruno's support, the eldest child always hoped that his biological parents would come for him and his sisters. Moreover, he even gave his sisters hope that this would happen one day. While still in prison, Raymond saw an ad in the dating section of a newspaper from a certain woman named Lucienne and responded to it. Soon, a correspondence began between him and Lucienne. When Raymond was released, he found this woman and married her. Shortly after the marriage, the idea occurred to him that he must get his children back by any means. So one night, the man, armed, broke into the house of the family who had his children. Hearing the noise in the house's first floor, the girls were terrified. Nadia couldn't remember what her father looked like, and Lydia didn't know the man at all. They thought it was none other than an ogre coming to eat them because they hadn't fallen asleep in time. Despite the resistance of the foster family, who threatened to call the police, Raymond managed to take the children from the foster family and put them in his car. There are no indications that this man's actions had legal consequences for him. Perhaps the representatives of the foster family were simply afraid of Raymond and did not report the abduction to the police. After several hours on the road, the man brought his children to his home, where he introduced them to Lucienne and said she was their new mother, meaning they had to obey her. Apparently, the first years of their life together were relatively calm, at least judging by the family photos taken during this time. The family moved to a new house in a quiet and cozy place. Raymond received welfare payments and simultaneously started his own business, offering instant printing of cards for all occasions and various office supplies. Lucienne also occasionally worked in her husband's business, but was mainly involved in office activities. Over time, the family's life began to change dramatically. The somewhat older children were cruelly treated and physically assaulted by their father and stepmother. The first thing Lydia remembered from that time was how Raymond beat her brother Bruno for playing with a neighbor's child. When the Guado couple went to work, they hired young girls to take care of the children. When Raymond returned home, he forced these girls to drink alcohol with him. Once, the man even tried to persuade one of the girls to be intimate with him, but she managed to escape. Later, the father of the hired girl came to the house to confront Raymond and injured him severely. After that, the man no longer hired babysitters. Sometime after this incident, Raymond bought a caravan to take his family on vacation to the sea. Upon arrival, the Guado family members spent time on the beach and swam in the water like other vacationers. However, something else happened that went beyond normal behavior. When Raymond was in the water, he approached his daughter Nadia and pressed her unnaturally close to his body. The girl tried to free herself from her father's embrace, but this only provoked him further. From that moment on, Nadia became the object of Raymond's perverse desires. Lydia remembered that one day she heard her sisters crying and pleading from the caravan, and that's when it all began. Raymond committed his first sexual offense against one of his daughters. Since then, regular beatings and even more horrific actions by the Guado spouses towards the children became the norm. Bruno and Nadia stopped attending elementary school, while Lydia didn't even know what it was. She was treated in the cruelest manner, possibly because she was not Raymond's biological daughter. A few years later, around 1971, when Lydia was just 8 years old, the real bullying began. The first documented health damage was caused by Lucienne, apparently because Lydia had gotten very dirty while playing outside. In response, the stepmother placed the girl in a bath with boiling water and bleach. Lydia later recalled that her delicate baby skin immediately peeled off and floated to the surface of the water. When Raymond heard the girl's screams, he ran into the bathroom, pulled Lydia out of the water, and laid her on the bed, trying to apply vegetable oil to the burns. However, he soon realized how severe the wounds were and had to take the girl to the hospital. Later, it was determined that Lydia had suffered third-degree burns. To avoid taking responsibility for his wife's actions, Raymond blamed the city administration, claiming they had supplied excessively hot water to the faucet. In the meantime, the girl was first placed in intensive care and then in the burn unit of the city of Lyon, where she stayed for several months. Lydia had to undergo several skin grafts. Raymond was always by her side, not because he was a good father, but to ensure the girl couldn't reveal what had really happened. Eventually, the man grew tired of the hospital stay and said he would take his daughter home to continue her treatment there. The specialists dealing with Lydia's health opposed this decision, but Raymond enlisted the support of their family doctor, who issued a certificate stating he would personally continue treating the child. Raymond then carried Lydia out of the burn unit. At home, the man indeed began treating the girl. He bathed her, regularly changed her bandages, and simultaneously started touching her. One day, Raymond came home with a camera and said he needed to take some pictures for the insurance company. First, he took a photo of Lydia, asking her to smile, and then took several photos of her intimate areas. Sometime later, Raymond approached his youngest daughter again and told her that their family doctor had prescribed her ether to inhale. Consequently, the man forced the child to inhale it. Afterward, the girl was in a semi-conscious state, aware that her father was doing something strange and painful to her at that moment. This marked Raymond's first crime against Lydia's sexual integrity. During this time, Raymond's wife stood by and not only did not stop him, but actively encouraged him. The girl, almost 9 years old, began to view what was happening as normal, thinking that her father loved her, and therefore there was nothing wrong with his actions. Years later, she explained in an interview with a French TV show how her father justified his terrible deeds. According to her, he told his children that he did this to make them feel good. He argued, among other things, that as a father, he had every right to do so. In 1975, the Guado family moved to the village of Conchy-sur-Gondoire in the Seine-et-Marne department, about 40 kilometers from Paris. At their new location, the abuse of the children by the couple continued. Moreover, the teenagers still did not attend school and had practically no contact with the outside world. After returning to work, Raymond obtained permission to park his caravan in the parking lot of a shopping center. To draw attention to his business, he placed photos of Lydia's burned legs on the vehicle, along with posters claiming that the girl had been burned due to the authorities' fault and had yet to receive compensation. This way, he created the impression of a father seeking public attention and justice. When he felt the photos alone were insufficient, he forced Lydia to accompany him and publicly displayed her horrific scars. He then exploited the sympathy of passers-by to sell his goods and fill his pockets with money. The first person to decide to end the bullying of Raymond and his wife was Bruno. Once, he and his sisters had already tried to escape, but were soon caught and punished. After this unsuccessful attempt, the 15-year-old boy, who had endured many years of physical assaults, managed to flee. Reports indicate that the young man approached the police and informed them about the situation at his parents' house. However, the government officials did not understand what they heard and simply placed the teenager in another foster family. Meanwhile, his sisters continued to suffer from their father's inclinations. As the girls grew older, their breasts began to develop. When Raymond noticed this, he started binding their chests tightly with elastic bandages, making it difficult for his daughters to breathe. The bandages themselves eventually turned into stinking rags because Raymond forbade removing them for months. He did not want anyone but himself to care for his daughters. Several years later, Bruno reappeared. The mature young man returned for his sister Nadia, who had already reached adulthood by that time. In the end, he was able to rescue her, while Lydia was still in danger. Her room had become the dark and damp attic of the house, where Raymond, without any fear, indulged all his perverse fantasies and tormented her 3 times a day. Lydia never forgave her sister and brother for leaving her there. She couldn't reconcile and tried to run away from home more than once. However, her father spread the information that his youngest daughter suffered from a mental illness. Therefore, when she approached the authorities, they immediately took her back home. After another escape attempt, Raymond completely chained the girl. When Lydia turned 18, her father decided it was time for her to bear his children. The man was so eager to realize his idea that after each act of intimacy, he tied the girl's legs, supposedly to increase the chances of pregnancy. At the age of 19, Lydia became pregnant for the first time and spent almost the entire next 9 months on a leash, as the man wanted to prevent possible abortion attempts. Lydia gave birth to her first child on December 8, 1982. The boy was named Raymond in honor of his father. Subsequently, Lydia did not give up her attempts to escape, but Raymond kept catching her and punishing her harshly. One day, she was locked in the attic for 6 months. During this time, her father and stepmother repeatedly mistreated her, often with improvised means and kitchen utensils. The rats became the girl's only friends. The first child was followed by 5 more children born between 1986 and 1996. Reports indicate that the last child, named Rudy, was not Raymond's son and was conceived during Lydia's next escape attempt. The children were, of course, the great pride of their vile father. Initially, they didn't even know who their real mother was. Neighbors, grocery store owners, and even local government officials came to greet the head of a large family and show their respect. Raymond, in turn, did not hide the origin of his children. This information was like an open secret. Every time Lydia prepared for childbirth, the man took her to a hospital outside their area and forced her to say under threat of death that he was her partner and the father of the children. Raymond knew exactly how to manipulate the girl, and Lydia simply lacked the strength or means to resist him. The end of this story came in 1999 when Raymond Guado, a diabetic, began to seriously deteriorate in health. In general, he never took care of his health. This time, however, the situation worsened significantly and several toes on his left foot were amputated. After the operation, the man again disregarded the doctor's recommendations, putting himself in a critical condition. One day, Lydia visited him in the hospital and learned that he had died the night before from a pulmonary embolism. When the girl heard this news, she burst into tears. It was as if she had forgotten in an instant everything that had happened to her because of the deceased. Later, Lydia could not explain the reason for such a reaction to the death of the man who had tormented her for so long. Perhaps it was because Raymond, despite everything, was the only constant in her miserable life. After leaving the hospital building, the girl remembered how she had once sworn to Raymond that she would end her life immediately after his death. Apparently, the years of control by the deceased had affected Lydia's consciousness. She drove to the nearest bridge and jumped into the river without hesitation. As she fell, she lost consciousness, and when she regained it, she was surrounded by rescuers who had pulled her from the water. At that moment, she realized that the horror of the past was behind her. Thus ended a story full of bullying, aggression, and imprisonment that lasted 28 years. Lydia was finally free. However, to her regret, she felt no satisfaction that Raymond had faced justice. After her release, Lydia, an illiterate and unemployed girl, faced several more difficult trials. She had to rebuild her life and establish relationships with her children, who had been raised by her father and stepmother and were denied any communication with her. Fortunately, after many years of ignoring the existing problem, the authorities provided support. Lydia was initially allowed to stay and live in the house where she had been held captive, although she no longer dared to go up to the attic, where she had been subjected to unspeakable abuse. Lydia's stepmother, then 68 years old, appeared in court only in 2007. Unfortunately, justice was not truly served in her case. The elderly woman was sentenced to 3 years probation for not preventing what her husband had done before her eyes. This sentence was later appealed and increased to 4 years probation. In 2008, when the media were in an uproar over another case of a woman who had been imprisoned for a long time, Lydia found the courage to tell everyone about her own experiences. She was still illiterate, but thanks to her collaboration with journalist and writer Jean-Michel Carrat, she was able to publish a book describing her thorny path to freedom. In her book, she criticized various government agencies that, in her opinion, had sent her back to hell during her escape attempts without even trying to understand the situation. In the book, Lydia paid special attention to her stepmother, a woman who had not only stood on the sidelines all those years, but had also actively participated in physical violence against her and other children. The medical staff who had treated her injuries, such as burns, bruises, and cuts, also did not escape her criticism. According to Lydia, the employees of the medical institutions simply turned a blind eye to the obvious signs of her mistreatment and preferred to remain on the sidelines. For similar reasons, Lydia criticized her neighbors, who, in her opinion, heard the children's cries every day, but still did not dare to contact any social organization and invite their workers to visit their home. Finally, Lydia blamed the entire French justice system for the inaction and the incomprehensible sentence imposed on her stepmother. After the publication of her book, the public learned about the horrors she had endured. At that moment, Lydia declared that she finally did not feel alone. She noted that while writing the material, some people had told her not to talk about what had happened to her, as it was personal. However, she believed that victims of such crimes should talk about everything, because it could save other people. In 2014, a book titled Ordinary Incest by ethnologist Léonore Lecour, a researcher at the National Center for Scientific Research in France, one of the world's most prestigious institutions, was published. In this publication, the author discussed Lydia's case, based on a year-long ethnographic study conducted in the town of Carlon, where the main events took place. Léonore tried to understand why none of the residents condemned Raymond's actions or reported the bullying to the authorities. Perhaps the answer to this question was hidden in a sentence spoken by one of the interviewed residents. When asked by the book's author, this man replied that, in his opinion, what happens behind the doors of a house should stay there. Sometime after gaining her freedom, Lydia met a man named Sylvain Skerla. Sylvain was apparently the man who came into her life to heal her soul from deep pain. Shortly after they met, the couple married and had 2 children. Lydia said she found hope in her husband. After meeting the love of her life, she gave several more interviews to the media and participated in the creation of several documentaries about her story. She still lives with indelible memories of her captivity, and the scars on her body constantly remind her of it. At the end of the 2000s, Lydia, with the support of a lawyer, turned to the Justice Commission to receive payments that victims of certain crimes are entitled to. In her appeal, she claimed that in addition to the torture and abuse by her guardians, she was also denied the opportunity for education, which undoubtedly made it difficult for her to find work. Moreover, she was not even registered with Social Security, since she still couldn't write and therefore couldn't fill out the necessary forms herself. The appeal also stated that due to the burns she had suffered in her youth, she had a certain degree of disability.